The Dell U2520D is a USB Type-C 1440p monitor that comes in at roughly $320 to £350, while in the US it can be found for roughly $350. In this review, we're going to be seeing if it's actually worth this price tag. Now, to kick things off, we're going to talk about its inputs because it's one of its USPs. You've got HDMI, DisplayPort, and USB Type-C, whereby the latter does support 90 watts of input, so therefore it will charge and indeed display from your laptop. And of course, if you're a PC user, you're not going to use this feature. Now, you can enable or disable USB charging through the OSD, and I'll showcase this very shortly. Now, elsewhere, when it comes to inputs and outputs, it's worth bearing in mind that this monitor does not have any built-in speakers, and as such, if you want to output audio via any of the display outputs, you'll want to do it via the 3.5mm auxiliary jack. Now, elsewhere, if you want to connect in terms of having a USB flash drive, or let's say peripherals connected up to the monitor, there's two Type A ports found underneath the monitor, and then a conveniently placed Type A and Type C port found on the left-hand side bezel. Now, on that note, I should mention the overall aesthetics and the build quality of the monitor is absolutely stunning. Here you've got a four-sided borderless design, OSD buttons which are very easy to access and in physical nature found at the bottom right of the monitor, and then around the back you've got a nice sort of silver coating which is in line with the stand. Speaking of which, the stand provides height, tilt, and swivel and rotate adjustments, which is very good and is furthermore very sturdy. If you do not want to use the built-in stand, and of course you want to use, let's say, a monitor arm and therefore have VESA compatibility, you do have it with this monitor, so there's no problem with multi-monitor setups. Now, moving on swiftly, we get on to image quality. Now, this monitor has an IPS panel, it's got a 25-inch form factor, and put across my Datacolor SpiderX Elite calibrator, I noted a 99.1% sRGB gamut coverage and 103.6% gamut volume. You can see here how it stacks up to the sRGB standard. Now, when it comes to color accuracy, it's absolutely spectacular. Average LTE sitting at 0.88 and a maximum of 1.76 with a contrast ratio of 962 to 1, which for my calibrator is pretty impressive. In a nutshell, what I will say here is this monitor can be used for professional work, image editing, video grading, or whatever have you, or let's say just regular browsing. It does have a dedicated sRGB and DCI-P3 coverages in terms of the OSD, so you can select them if you want, or alternatively, if you don't want one of those color spaces, you can customize the colors to your own heart's content. Now, next up we get onto brightness, and here the monitor yet again excels. It's got a peak brightness of 322 nits and a minimum of 26 nits, which should definitely suffice for all sorts of individuals, and as such, if you're going to be running this in a bright or let's say a dim room, you're going to have any problems in terms of any sort of eye strain. As for its brightness uniformity, it's not quite perfect, although there's a bit of panel lottery involved over here. With my panel, I noticed on the bottom left hand side the uniformity wasn't quite good, and then of course when I put it in terms of backlight bleed test, I did notice a little bit of bleed across the monitor. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your use case, but subjectively I will say the backlight bleed is perfectly acceptable, and given that we're talking about IPS panel, it should be expected to a certain degree. Now, next up we get on to gaming performance, and I do appreciate this monitor isn't a gaming panel in the slightest, but just in case someone wants to use this for, say, casual gaming, I just thought I should comment on it given my experience of gaming and indeed reviewing monitors. Now, the monitor, as I mentioned, is a 1440p monitor, but it runs at a maximum refresh rate of 60 Hz. Now, as such, the monitor doesn't feel that fluid, and when it comes to its response time, it's actually pretty shocking. If you run it in terms of its normal overdrive mode, what you'll find is that it's perfectly fine with very little inverse ghosting. Run it in terms of its fast overdrive mode, and therefore benefiting from faster response time, what you'll find is that there's quite a bit of inverse ghosting, and even in a potato game that's like Counter-Strike, you will still find that there is a lot of inverse ghosting, and as such, if you're playing more visually appealing games, you might want to just run it on terms of its normal overdrive, and as such, you'll have to bear in mind that you're not getting the best response time of the monitor. As for input lag, it is actually not that great, and although my performance on deathmatch on matchmaking was perfectly fine, I do find that I did notice a little bit of delay between my clicks and swipes, versus what it was appearing on screen. This monitor is not really tailored for gamers, and there's some other monitors out there which will appeal for you, and in that case, if you're interested of seeing those monitors, do check them down in the description below. Now moving on to the monitor's OSD, it's pretty accessible via the buttons found underneath the bottom right side of the monitor. Now here you can see the brightness and contrast. Of course that's very subjective and based on your own ambient light conditions. Input sources is pretty self-explanatory, and as for the color modes, as I mentioned before, I went on the color space and enabled sRGB, but you can see over here you can select DCI-P3 if you so wish as well, among the other modes as well, including the custom color. Now then, going out of that and we go into display, what you'll find is a variety of other settings, such as a response time setting, which I alluded to before. The MST, now this is to do with daisy chaining, if you're going to be using it or not via display ports, so it might be quite handy if you have multi-monitor setup. And you've got the smart HDR. As for the menu, that's to do with the OSD settings and the personalization. Here you'll be interested to know that you've got the USB charging, for example, at 90 watts, and here you can have it enabled or disabled when you have your monitor powered off entirely, which can be useful if you're going to be charging your laptop while having your monitor completely off. Then others is to do with some monitor settings, so for example the input resolution and the refresh rate. And so this all brings me on to my verdict. Now this monitor isn't made for gaming, granted, and also it's a little bit more expensive than the likes of a Philips monitor that I previously reviewed, which will be down in the description below. And furthermore, it doesn't have built-in speakers, which might be upsetting to certain individuals. But fundamentally, for what it does offer, I think Dell have done a fantastic job. It offers fantastic sRGB color accuracy, great aesthetics, a good quality stand, and also an OSD that's very comprehensively laid out. And furthermore, and more importantly, that USB Type-C input/output, which also delivers 90 watts of power. Ultimately, this is potentially one of the best monitors for productivity, and as such, it actually gets my Best Buy award. Now do let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and of course, if you do like this video, do drop a like, and of course subscribe and hit that bell notification, as it would be greatly appreciated. I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.